Thank you very much, Tavia. As you can see, Vine Church, we're going to be again in chapter 12 of Exodus today. We're continuing our story here. We're going to take a little break from it next week. Next week being the Sunday before Christmas, we're going to take a break from this and focus specifically on the birth of Jesus. I'm going to use the Gospel of John, the Word becoming flesh, as our text for next week. But we're still working our way through Exodus today, through this week, and we're going to pick that back up after Christmas as well. We're moving. I've said this the last couple weeks. Like, this is moving to the crescendo point, to the big point, to the breaking point of what our story has had so far. Right? This is a rescue story, the exodus of God's people from slavery in Egypt. They're bound up in slavery. They're slaves. They're treated with violence and death and slavery in Egypt. And God hears the call of his people. He sees what they're going through. He remembers his covenant, and he's going to act. So this is a rescue story. God is rescuing his people from their oppression and their slavery. And mixed in this story of rescue is also a story of judgment, and it's also a story of God's revelation. So it's three things kind of together in that. And you'll see that oftentimes in the Bible. When a story of rescue is at hand, there's also a story of judgment connected to it. Because if you need rescued from some kind of oppression, humans are doing evil that they need to be judged for. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that oppression to begin with. And in the midst of God doing that rescue, doing that judgment, God reveals his character, his nature, his power, his authority. And in that, you see this revelation of God, God revealing his power and who he is. And so all of these things are mixed together. And we've been seeing it for the past few months. It's kind of building and building and building as you're going through all of these different plagues of Egypt, that God is ramping up his power, his authority, his judgment on Egypt, on Pharaoh, on the gods of Egypt. And as he's ramping that up, he's providing rescue for his people. And so a couple weeks ago, we focused heavily on this 10th plague and the judgment aspect of it, how it was going to be a judgment of God on Egypt, on Pharaoh, and on the gods of Egypt in this death of the firstborn through the destroyer that we saw even last week. I want to state, there's real heavy, important stuff to process in that event. If you have more questions on that, please go back to a couple weeks ago and read that, or listen to that sermon, go through that text, because we don't have time to go into it again. And I don't want you to feel like I'm just glancing over the heaviness of it. So go back and look at that if you want. But what we focused on last week and this week is the rescue. And the rescue itself is bound up in these two ordinances, remembrances that God is establishing with his people Israel. Last week was the Passover lamb. This week is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So these things become remembrances for them. We'll look at our first line here today. It says in verse 1, this day shall be, verse 14. So I remind you, I'm bouncing back and forth as we covered Passover last week and unleavened bread this week. Those two things are mixed together in chapter 12. And so I kind of bounced back and forth last week to cover the Passover, and I'm bouncing back and forth this week a bit, not what I normally do, to cover unleavened bread. And so verse 14 says, now this day shall be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. So what's happening here, as these actions are taking place, God's using this as a moment for Israel to set up and establish a remembrance. The way he says is a memorial or a feast or a celebration or a permanent ordinance is what he's setting up here. We do this all the time, right? The idea of a memorial is remembering something. It is bringing to memory something you may or may not have memory of even. So, oftentimes we'll do that. Something happens in our life, but as you go busy working through life, you forget about that important things. Sometimes you take a moment and remember those things. And that might be connected to us in our lives. I don't know why this is popping in my head, but a few years ago, my mother passed away. There is a gravestone out in Everett at the cemetery where she's buried, and I've gone out a couple times to remember, to know that, I know this person. I care about this person, and they're not here anymore. My life is different, but I go back and I remember that person. So there might be things like that where I'm remembering something individually, but this is something beyond just my life, beyond just your life. They're remembering something that's going to be remembered for generations, it says. For not just their lifetime, but their kids' lifetime, their grandkids' lifetime, their grandkids' lifetime, that there's something that happened in previous generations that's worth remembering. We do this. Why do you think we have a tree and a star and a manger? And this is what we're doing. We're remembering something that happened 2,000 years ago. That's a long time. Something happened 2,000 years ago that changed everything. And there was a need to remember that for generations, thousands of years. There's been a need to remember that God became man and took on flesh and engaged this world in a way in which he dealt with all the joys in it, all the pains of it, and God became human. We remember that in Christmas. We do the same thing at Easter, right? We remember that same incarnate Jesus Christ. Jesus, the Messiah, gave his life on the cross as the Passover lamb. We remember the Passover lamb given to us in Easter. We need those remembrances, those memories. We're bringing to memory something that we may not even have experienced, but we're remembering that Jesus died on a cross. We're remembering that 3 days later he rose from the dead. Not only are we doing this at Christmas and Easter, we do this every week. We have communion up here. And Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, in memory of me. Remember my body and my blood given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. These are important. They're important markers. And God's setting up one of these with the children of Israel of what's going on here in Egypt and in the slavery in Egypt. That's not going to just be a marker for them, but it's going to be a marker for future generations. Both this Passover lamb celebration, which we saw last week, getting the Passover lamb, living with it for 4 days, slaughtering the lamb, using the blood on the lintel of the house so that the destroyer passes over your house. We saw that last week. And this one is going to be more about this feast of unleavened bread. So verse 15, it says, for 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. But on the first day you shall remove the dough with yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So he's saying what they're going to remember. This is the celebration, the memory that you're going to put in place. And for 7 days, you're going to remove the unleavened, you're going to only eat unleavened bread. You're going to remove the dough with yeast in your houses from the first day till the 7th day. 7 days of no bread with yeast. I know I told you I was going to use the pictures later in our service, but I want to show you some pictures of my bread making skills. I mean, it's to teach a lesson, but I really just want to show that I like to make good bread. So if you can show, let's roll through them a bit. I want to give just a little bit of a lesson here if you don't know much about bread making. So I have this thing that sits in my fridge. If we can show that first picture here. I know I showed them wrong time, so it might take us a second. Here we go. This little guy, and you can tell of all the pictures I have, this is the most quality picture because my wife took this one this morning. The rest of them are not so good. I have this little jar sitting in my fridge, and it's always active, and it's nasty, and it's weird, and it just sits there, and I feed it every now and then because it gets grumpy if it doesn't get fed, and it just sits and lives in my fridge. If you open that top and smell it, it's pretty ripe. It's pretty nasty when you smell it. Okay, so I will take that thing. This is the yeast. This is the leaven. This is the activity of the bread. It's always staying alive. I will mix that with some flour and water and get my first start of dough, which is pretty plain, boring, not much activity. It looks gross, right? You wouldn't want to eat that. That, I will fold that thing and move it and work with it for 4 hours, and I get this. The yeast that was started starts activating in the bread, and it starts rising. It starts getting a little bit of firmness to it, a little bit of rise to it, and that's at the 4-hour mark. 4 hours later, I'll put it in baskets at this time, and it'll rise for another 4 hours, where it's just sitting in these baskets ready for me to make bread in the near future. You'll see on that picture on the right, you got that big bubble. Too soon. Oh, okay. That's all right. The picture on your right, you got a bubble even on the top of that thing. The idea of you can see the activity. That bubble wouldn't be there without the activity of the yeast. And it's doing its rise until now the crescendo, the beautiful bread that is made. Yeah, I'm vain. But I want you to see, I know more about this a bit just because of I've been doing this for 5 years or so, but whatever. The idea here is that's a beautiful piece of bread. That is leavened bread. That is not the kind of bread they're eating. You can take the picture off now if you want. So that's not the kind of picture that the bread that they're eating. What they're eating is bread that didn't have the first part, that didn't have that starter. And it's just flour, water mixed together without any kind of rise, any kind of bubbles, and they're supposed to eat that, only that. Not tasty, good bread for 7 days is what they have to eat. And they're going to, the first day of their feast, they're going to take that jar that I had and throw it away. They're not using that yeast anymore. They're removing any bread with yeast. They're getting it out of their house. And all they have for the next 7 days is flour, water, no rise, and that's what they're supposed to celebrate for 7 days. So you got the words of what they're going to do, and this is a serious deal, because he even says at the end of it, anything with yeast from the first day to the seventh day, if anyone eats anything with yeast, that person is cut off from Israel. That's a big deal. Cut off means like if anybody breaks the rules, keeps some leaven, makes some good bread, eats some of that good bread, they're cut off from the community. They're removed from, that's serious what he's talking about. They're cut off from the community. They're cut off from the blessings of Yahweh. They're cut off from eternal life. They're cut off from the community of God. So God's establishing this is a pretty big deal. Verse 16, we want to start understanding, okay, we understand that we're only supposed to eat this kind of bread, but why? What is this about? Why do we care about just eating bread like this? This is where this story is going to move forward. Verse 16, he says, on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the seventh day. No work at all shall be done on them, except for what is eaten by every person, that alone may be prepared by you. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, for on this day I brought your multitudes out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall keep this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance. So he starts developing it a little bit more, right? So far, this idea, you remove the yeast from the houses, 7 days you got to eat this nasty bread. And then he says, on the first day that you start eating the bad bread, I'm just going to keep calling it that because it is. On the first day that you start eating the bad bread, if you don't believe me, look at the crackers here, eat those later, you'll remember it's bad bread. The first day of that 7 days, it's a holy assembly. It's a gathering of the people, and it's a holy gathering of God's people. The set-apart people of God are gathering together. They're gathering together. It's a calling out together. It's a reading aloud. It's the consecration, being set apart. It's a day devoted to worship and a sacred day. It's what we're doing right now. You set aside a day to get up in the morning if you don't normally get up this time of day. To get ready and go somewhere, to get out of your house and to come here and to be with other people and to sing songs together and to hear scripture read together and to pray together and to listen to God's word together. It is a holy thing that's happening here. This is a holy assembly of God's people. So important and so beautiful. Thank you for being here. Keep doing it every Sunday. It's important. It's important for us to be here. You can engage it online, but better to be here. It's good for this. Like the gathering of God's people, the calling and reading aloud, the set-apart worship of God's people. On the first day of this celebration, you're going to have this kind of holy assembly, and on the last day of this celebration, you're going to have a holy assembly. And he said, no work is to be done on those. This doesn't mean God's anti-work. God is the one that established work. In the garden, he made you to work, build, create, move, and do, right? Like he made that. He's not against it, but he's showing you there's something more important than it. There's something more important than creating and doing and being productive. The thing that's more important than that is your worship and connection with Yahweh. So he tells the people, on that day, do not work. On the last day, do not work, unless whatever you need to prepare the food, because we're having a feast and a celebration. But other than that, there's no work to be done on that day. And then he said specifically, one of the indicators of what this is all about. He says, on this very day, I brought your multitudes out of the land of Egypt. What you're remembering, what you're bringing to memory is Yahweh saved us. Yahweh rescued us. For hundreds of years, we were in slavery and we were calling out to Yahweh, and he heard our call, and he came and he judged Egypt and Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt, and he saved us. He gave us a Passover lamb that saved us, and he rescued us, and he called us out of Egypt, and we're remembering the fact that he called us out of Egypt. There's more to it than that, but you start to get a hint of what we're trying to remember here. this generational permanent ordinance that he's setting up. He says in verse 18 that in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. So far he said 7 days. Now he's specifying which 7 days. And this is important, right? Day 14 of the first month to day 21 of the first month. Remember last week, they established a new first month, and on that new first month, on day 10, they were supposed to go find a lamb, a spotless, blameless lamb, and bring it into the family for 4 days. And then after 4 days, on the 14th day of the month, they are to slaughter this lamb, take its blood, apply it to the house post. And this is saying, once that's done, you go directly into unleavened bread, removing the bread from your house and this 7-day celebration. So we know it's tied to the first. We know that God is telling us to remove this leaven, to eat this bad bread, to do that for 7 days, and we're doing it immediately after we've sacrificed the Passover lamb. So something in what that rescue came from the Passover lamb is now moving into this idea of unleavened bread. And so we'll keep building on this idea. Why are these two tied together? What exactly does it mean other than us being, the children of Israel being brought out and their multitudes out of Egypt? He says here in verse 19 that for 7 days there shall be no dough with yeast in your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast, that person shall be cut off. So a reminder again of the importance of this. From the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native in the land, you shall eat nothing with yeast in all of your dwellings, you shall eat unleavened bread. So he throws out that line of stranger and native. I'll leave it just for a minute because we'll get into more depth of this as we go on. But the general idea here is that all of Israel, who encompasses Israel, is not just people who are naturally, natively born into Israel, but also other people that connect themselves, that convert to Israel and the worship of Yahweh. And we'll see more of that as we go forward. But the idea there is this is a partial fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. God's plan was not just to bless the nation of Israel, but through the nation of Israel to bless the entirety of the world. And so he sets up this framework of what they're supposed to remember for generations moving forward. Now, from this point, we jumped into what we looked at last week, this idea of the Passover. He also sets up the Passover celebration. You have the death of the firstborn that took place last week, and then you have at the end of that, Pharaoh saying to Moses, get out of here, leave. Like we covered all of that last week. So we have this, what you're supposed to do, then you have the story develop in what God was doing in the death of the firstborn, and then Pharaoh finally telling them to leave. This is right after that, so I'm jumping ahead to right after that point. In verse 33, it says, the Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in a hurry. And they said, we will all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened with their kneading bowls bound up in their clothes on their shoulders. So we start to get more of an understanding of what's happened here, right? Pharaoh is said to Moses, the last plague has already happened, and Pharaoh's telling Moses, get out of here. Take your people, take your kids, your wife, take your animals, get out of Egypt. Don't ever come back. Get out of here. And now the people of Egypt are saying the same thing. Leave, and leave quick. Get out of my town. Get out of this area. They want the Israelites out of there and out of there immediately. There's a hurry to this. Leave that land in a hurry, and he says, so much of a hurry that you don't have the opportunity to wait the 4 hours for your bread dough to rise. Right? That whole process I just talked to you about, that takes me a day. Actually, it's the night before. I start making my starter with that first thing that you saw the night before. I wake up about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and I start building that first one. I wait till noon before the first section's done. I'll wait till 4 o'clock before it's ready to put in the oven. By the time it's out of the oven, it's 6 o'clock. This is why most people don't make bread. This is why you put fast-acting yeast in your bread, and you don't do it this way, because it takes forever. They don't have that kind of time. Egypt wants them out of there now. So they said they just have to grab whatever they have dough-wise, throw it in the clothes that they have on their back, and leave. This is a hurry. So what we're starting to realize is this memorial that God is setting up, it's reminding them that he freed them and removed them from Egypt, but it's also reminding them the way in which it took place, in a hurry, without any ability to have any kind of preparation for this journey that you're going to be on. Are you a planner or a prepper if you're going away for a bit? Like our family might take 5 of us, take a trip to Oregon coast, and we got to pack up that car like crazy. I mean, I got so much stuff in the car, can't fit it in the car. I got to put the topper on top of the car, and we're putting stuff on top of the car. And when you're trying to come home, you realize, why did I take this much stuff? Because I can't fit it all in again. We prepare for 3 days. These people are leaving their entire life and no time to even grab food. They're just grabbing ingredients. This is an ingredient family, right? They're grabbing their ingredients and they're throwing it in their clothes and they're gone in an instant. So they're remembering this as well. But we'll develop this even further. So verse 35, it says, "Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses. For they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Therefore they plundered the Egyptians." A little bit of a side point, but it's continuing the story a little bit further. Remember, Moses told them already, hey, you're going to do this. You're going to ask for their gold and silver, and they're going to give it to you. This is when it's actually happening. Not only did Moses tell them this was going to happen, God told Abraham in Genesis 15 that, hey, your ancestors are going to go down into Egypt for 400 years, and when they leave, they're going to come out with plunder. This is what's happening here. Now, this is normal in their day and age when a conquering king takes over a people, that they plunder those people. This is different, though. This is not done by power and authority. It's done by favor and request. They're to ask. And in their asking, it says that God gave them favor, that the people of Egypt had some kind of favor or grace or goodwill towards the Hebrew people enough to give the request that was being asked, their gold and silver. Now, it's interesting. It doesn't go beyond there to say, why this? Why did they need this? Why is God asking them to do this? My brain can jump to a couple thoughts, but these are just thoughts. They're not for sure because the Bible doesn't describe it. One thought might be they're going to be on a journey for a while. They're going to need some resources. You're going to also see in the future that they're going to use some of these resources to build a tabernacle for Yahweh. So maybe it's for some of that. It's preparation for some of that. Also, my brain kind of goes to, the Egyptians have been taken from the Hebrews for 400 years. And this is a bit of return on what they've been taken. I don't know. These are guesses. What we do know is Yahweh has said, you're going to leave with, and you're going to ask, and you're going to have favor in their sight, and they're going to give. There's going to be a generous, kind plundering, which is different than any other time you'd see in human history. So you have these people. The firstborn has died. Pharaoh and the Egyptians are saying, get out of here in a hurry. They don't even have time to let their bread rise. They're taking it with them, and they're taking the plunder of Egypt. Verse 37 says, "Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from the children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds of very large herds, a very large number of livestock. And they baked the dough with which they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had no yeast, since they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves." Okay, now, think through what's happening here. It says at this point, 600,000 men is what's leaving Ramses to Succoth. Ramses, this has shown up in the stories before, right? Ramses is one of the 2 store cities that the Hebrew slaves were forced to build for Pharaoh so he could store all of his gold, silver, everything that he had, all the extra stuff that he had. And that's where they're living around that area, and they now have to leave that area. And this initial journey is just a short journey south, maybe like 10, 15, 20 miles, not a large journey. But it's a massive endeavor, because you not only have 600,000 men, you also have the women and children with that, which estimates would be probably somewhere around 2 million people. And you have a mixed multitude. So you have this mixed multitude is there are Egyptians or other people from other nationalities that are in Egypt during this time that are attaching themselves to Israel and leaving with Israel. This is a massive amount of people. And not only that, their livestock is going with them. Their sheep, their goats, and their cattle are going with them. It says a very large number of livestock. This is a moving party. I was trying to put into perspective to myself, how does 2 million people relate to what I see every day? And the best connection I could see is King County is 2.4 million people right now. It's a little more than what we're talking about here, but not drastically different. Can you imagine all of King County getting together to move without any provisions? The only provisions you have is this bread that you grabbed in a hurry, this dough that you grabbed in a hurry. And they leave and they go this 15, 20 miles south, and that's all the further they can make it in that day that they were forced out. They were forced out quick, and that's all the further they could go. It's time to eat something, so they take the bread out of their bag with their clothes that probably now smell nasty from their clothes, I don't know. And then they bake that without any leaven, and it's this flat, stinky bread that doesn't taste good. And that's their provision for the night. And it's a reminder to them of how quickly they had to leave Egypt and how they had no ability to make any provisions for themselves. So not only God is rescuing his people, but in the rescue of his people, they are going to be deeply connected to him for their provision. They're not going to be able to prepare and take care of this themselves. Let me jump to the next line here. It just builds on the same idea that we've been seeing so far, right? This remembrance that you're supposed to have of 7 days of unleavened bread, remembering that God is pulling us out of Egypt, that he's given us freedom, remembering that this is happening in a hurry, remembering that there's no provision for us. And then I think there's this last point that you're going to see here in verse 40. Now the time that the sons of Israel had lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of 430 years, on this very day, all the multitudes of the Lord departed from the land of Egypt. The point he's trying to make here is think about how long these people have lived in Egypt. They lived in Egypt for 430 years. They settled there. They made homes there. All that they've known is Egypt for generation after generation after generation. Even if it's slavery and oppression, it's all they know. It's where their home is. They're forced to leave their home. What does it say? This very day. Imagine what those people are going through. Yes, God, free us, give us rescue. But as the rescue comes, it's like you've got to leave everything that you know. All of your generations, last 2, 3, 4, 5 generations know. You're going to leave all of that in an instant without the ability to pack, without the ability to take any food. You're gone in an instant from everything you know. You're totally disconnected from Egypt. And you're moving forward in this new relationship with Yahweh. Essentially, I think that's what connects this the most to the idea of yeast and leaven. Yeast and leaven, you'll see this pull up multiple times throughout the scripture. It's the idea that how this little thing has the ability to affect the whole. With the bread I was trying to show you, that little jar and its yeast, and I don't use that whole jar. I just take a little spoonful, like a tablespoon of that to use for the next bread. That little tablespoon of that stuff that I put in my new dough will infect the entirety of the dough if it's a good loaf. If it's flat, that didn't do well. You don't want that one. It'll infect the entirety of the new dough. This is what's going on with Egypt. Egypt has infected the Hebrew Israelites. And in an instant, they are to leave that leaven and start anew with Yahweh, where they're going to have to trust Yahweh as they go. To try to push that point a little bit more, let me look at a couple New Testament texts where New Testament authors are using this same idea of leaven. It becomes a pretty common theme. Jesus uses it in Luke 12. He says in Luke 12, halfway through that, verse 1, he says, he began saying to his disciples, first of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nothing hidden that will not be known. Jesus is using leavened and connecting it to the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. He's saying the religious leaders' hypocrisy is like leaven. It's an infection that's infecting the rest of the people of God. Beware of that. Beware how that hypocrisy is spreading, how it's spreading to all of us. And beware, because he says specifically that what is hidden will be revealed. What is not known will be known. You cannot hide the hypocrisy. Beware of that spiritual hypocrisy that spreads throughout all. You think that was something that Jesus needed to warn people about 2,000 years ago? Or do we still need that today? Beware of my hypocrisy. Beware of your elders' hypocrisy. Beware of each other's hypocrisy. It spreads. If I'm a hypocrite, easy for you to be hypocrite, easy for all of us to be hypocrite. Heed the words of Jesus. And he's saying, remove that yeast. Let me go to how Paul uses it in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. There's a sin happening in the church of Corinth. It's a pretty major sin, and the church is doing nothing about it, not dealing with it at all. Not so much are they not dealing with it. It says here in verse 6 of chapter 5, your boasting is not good. They're not just not doing anything about it, they're boasting about it. And then he says, do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? Now you understand this passage, right? A little leaven leavens the whole dough. Just a tablespoon of that starter will infect the entirety of the dough. He's essentially saying that little bit of sin that you promote or boast about or don't do anything about, it infects the entirety of all of us. He connects this deeply to our text here, where this is where Paul's word says, clean out the old leaven. It's part of the Passover, part of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? The first day, you remove the dough that has any leaven. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are, in fact, unleavened. I love what he says here. What is he saying? He's like, take out the dough that has the leaven. Remove the sin from you. Why? Because you want to be a new lump of dough without the leaven. And he says, not just because you want to be that, because you are unleavened. He's not just saying what you need to make happen practically. He's talking about your identity of who you already are in Jesus. Jesus has forgiven all of your leaven, all of your sin. And he's given to you his very righteousness. You have no leaven in you from God's standpoint. That's who you are. So don't practically live out sin. Let it go. Remove the sin from your life and live this new life of unleavened bread. It's beautiful. He says, after he says, you are in fact unleavened, for Christ, our Passover lamb, our Passover also has been sacrificed. Equating the two celebrations, right? You've been rescued. You've been set free. Leave Egypt. Leave the leaven. Leave the sin behind. You are a new dough, a new loaf. Be with Jesus and without the sin. Move forward with Jesus. Move forward with Yahweh into a new life with Yahweh. Beautiful reminder for us, right? If you are like saved and rescued by the sacrificed lamb, Jesus Christ, the lamb who gave his blood that you applied to the lintel of your doorpost by bringing Jesus into your heart, into your life. If the blood of Jesus has paid for your sins, you are a new loaf of bread. Whatever. There's no leaven there anymore. So stop bringing in the old leaven. Let it go. And walk forward in this new life with Yahweh. That's not just for the people of Israel thousands of years ago. That's for us today. Paul's talking to the church. Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let's celebrate the feast. Celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. Not with old leaven, not with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Beautiful picture he's saying here. Church, the Passover lamb has been slayed for your sin. Celebrate this new feast. Not with the old leaven. Specifically, he says here, the old leaven of malice and wickedness. But the new leaven. What should grow and infect in the body of the church? It's not like we're an unleavened bunch. We should eat good bread. We should have leaven, but it should be good leaven. Not sin spreading through us, but goodness spreading through us. Specifically, the leaven of sincerity and truth. May we be a sincere people, not a hypocritical people. May we be a people that deeply love the truth of God and are trying to live out the truth of God. Let that infect us, because the Passover lamb has been sacrificed. I think this is the depth of what God is instilling in this feast of unleavened bread. He's rescuing his people. He's doing so in a hurry. They're not going to make provisions for themselves. They're going to need Yahweh to provide for them on this journey. And essentially, all they've known in Egypt for 400 years is gone like that. It's gone in an instant. They are to leave Egypt and the leaven of Egypt and Egypt's influence, and they are to move forward with the Passover lamb that was slayed for them, and they're going to move forward with Yahweh into this new beginning with Yahweh. Got one more little section here. We'll clean this up, and then we'll be done. He says, verse 42, it is a night to be observed for the Lord. For having brought them out of the land of Egypt, this night is for the Lord to be observed by all the sons of Israel throughout their generations. A continued remembrance. Verse 43, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. So now we're back at the Passover just for a minute as I wrap this up. Ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner is to eat it, but as for every slave that someone has purchased with money, after you have circumcised him, then he may eat. A stranger or a hired worker shall not eat it. It is to be eaten in a single house. You're not to bring any of the meat outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. All of the congregation of Israel is to celebrate this. But if a stranger resides with you and celebrates the Passover of the Lord, all of his males are to be circumcised. And then he shall come near to celebrate it, and he shall be like a native to the land. No uncircumcised male may eat any of it. The same law shall apply to the native as to the stranger who resides among you. This seems weird, right? Two side points to hit real quick to get into the big idea here. One is, like you probably saw that line of those who have slaves that were purchased with money. This will bring up a bigger conversation on slavery. I'm not going to dive into that, but I am going to say at least understand that Yahweh's rules for slavery are very different than the people around him at this time. And specific, if you think that he's for it, just realize at this moment he is freeing people from slavery. And he's giving provision for how these people can become a part of the family, a part of the community. I'll put a little pin in there. You want to talk to me about that later, come see me later. We'll talk about that one, okay? But the other point that you see in here, it says you're supposed to eat all the meat of the sacrificed lamb, and you're not to break any bone of it. Did that spark anything in your brain when it said you're not to break any bone of it? You're not supposed to break any bone of the Passover lamb. What happens at the death of Jesus when he's hanging on the cross? And the guards come by, the soldiers come by to do what they do with someone hanging on the cross too long. They break his shin bones. They break your leg bones so that you can no longer stand up and get a breath with your feet on the nails. Don't want to go too much into it, but it's death by asphyxiation. You cannot breathe anymore. Essentially what's happening here is you're in so much pain, but you cannot breathe. As you're starting to hang from the cross and you're letting your body dangle a bit, you can't breathe anymore. So you need to breathe. So you got to muster up enough strength off your hands and your nail and your feet to get up enough to catch your breath, and you're going through complete agony to then come back down again, and you can't breathe anymore. And you're back and forth between extreme pain and can't breathe, back and forth for hours. And there's a point where they say too much, break their legs, they can no longer catch their breath, and they're going to die quicker. So the soldiers come by to do that to Jesus, and they don't, because it's already been told, you don't break a bone of the Passover lamb. This is another, over and over again, this is clear pictures of Jesus hundreds, thousands of years before Jesus is even around the scene. The sacrifice of the Passover lamb. And specifically what he's showing here in this slave or servant, stranger, native, foreigner, what he's talking about here is like anyone can be connected to the people of God. There is a mixed multitude leaving Egypt with them. And as long as they get circumcised, essentially, as long as they join Yahweh, as we do today getting baptized, if you join Yahweh, anyone can be a part of his family. Not only can anyone be a part of his family, those that pretend to be a part of his family but eat the unleavened bread, they're cut off from the family of God. We already saw that, right? You can be a native born who's cut off if you really aren't committed to Yahweh. Or you can be a non-native person who is committed to Yahweh and you're part of the family. What is we saw it last week, what did John the Baptist say when he saw Jesus coming to get baptized for him? Here's the Lamb of God, who what? Takes away the sins of the world. The Passover Lamb of Yahweh, who takes over the sins, who pays for the leaven, not just Israel, all the world. And God's even setting the foundation for that even in this story. Anyone can attach themselves to the family of God. We'll end this with last few verses, 50 and 51. It says, "Then all the sons of Israel did so. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their multitudes." Okay, mark this, where it says the children of Israel, the multitudes, those who are attached to him, they did just as the Lord had commanded. This might be one of the last times they do that. Because they're human. They're like us. But the key is, Yahweh has revealed himself, they trust him, and they obey. Trust and obedience is always connected in the scriptures. You ever feel like sometimes you read the Bible and it's like God's just like the rule person telling you to do all the rules and you're supposed to just follow the rules? It's not about following the rules. It's about trusting the one who's making the rules. Trusting the one who made your life, who made this world, made it operate a certain way. And he's trying to say, this is how it's going to work best for you and everyone around you. This is how you're going to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. This is how you're going to treat others with respect and love your neighbor as yourself. It's not about just arbitrary rules. It's about trusting Yahweh and his way of life, leading to your flourishing, your relationship with your Creator, and love of all people that you're around. And the people of Israel here have seen enough from Yahweh to say, we trust you. That's different than Pharaoh. Pharaoh has kept saying, I'm the king here, not you. He didn't humble himself. The people of Israel here humble themselves, trust Yahweh, and are obedient to God's ways. How do we wrap all this up together? This feast of unleavened bread, this memory or this remembrance of the freedom that God provided to his people. Provided to them in a hurry, not able to prepare anything, being very dependent on Yahweh. That they had to change everything in an instant. When they had to leave the influence and fermentation, the yeast of Egypt, and move into a new beginning with Yahweh. Not just the people of Israel, but a mixed multitude. All those pieces that we see in this celebration are connected to us today. The Passover lamb has been sacrificed. Freedom is available to you. Freedom from your sin. Payment for your sin is available to you today. You can be a part of the family of Yahweh. A mixed multitude is who we are. Anyone in this world can be a part of Yahweh's family. That yes, we are dependent on him for everything. There is no provisions you can take into this thing. It's him and him giving us the provisions. And what it is leaving the yeast of sin behind, leaving the old life behind, and moving forward into a new beginning with Yahweh. The Passover lamb has been sacrificed. He paid for your sins. They're paid for. You are an unleavened new loaf. So leave behind the old person and move forward into a new beginning with Yahweh. That's what God is setting up for us. And the question for us, like it was for them, do we trust him? Do we obey? Do we move forward in that? And this is a daily discussion, daily thing that we have to think through. The Passover lamb has been sacrificed, and you will remember that today. The bread you eat, the unleavened, nasty bread that you eat, will represent the fact that there was no sin in your Passover lamb. That he gave his body for you. That he poured out his blood, that you could apply it to your lintel of your house, and you could be rescued. That you are no longer connected with Egypt. You are no longer connected with the sins of this world. You are made anew and afresh through this relationship with Yahweh to be able to have a new beginning with him. And you might say, well, I feel like I have to have a new beginning every day. It's okay. Have a new beginning every day. Because the sacrifice of Jesus pays for all of your sins, past, present, and future. You're not unleavened because you stopped sinning. You're unleavened because Jesus. Now go practically make it true by living this new life with Yahweh. That's what we're remembering every week when we come forward and take this. We have our memory as well. And it stems from this story, and it moves to Jesus, and it moves to us, followers of Jesus, doing this for the last 2,000 years, and we'll keep doing this to the day he returns. Let's go ahead and pray.